Chapter 1101 Pest Control Squad. That evening, Gao Tianwu and his brothers had a full meal. Although they had labored for a day and were beaten up by the rebellious villagers, Gao Tianwu and Xiao Guang were both mutants and recovered relatively quickly. The other brothers were also all physically strong after countless trainings after the end of the world and weren't beaten so easily. Gao Tianwu lit a fire to warm up his brothers, and once the temperature came up, everyone was in a much better state. The frogs didn't seem to like the fire too much, so they ran to the distant bed and huffed and puffed. After all, a frog was in need of hibernation too. If it was happy, it could sleep for months. So even if it didn't eat or drink for a few months, it wouldn't starve to death. Gao Tianwu discussed with his brothers, "I am not going to stay in this Gaoyuan village. This time when we take over Mr. Zhang's job, we must do our best. As long as we do a good job, we will be able to follow Mr. Zhang in the future and make a good career." Xiao Guang said coldly with a sullen face, "Those ungrateful villains, I won't just let this matter go with them. Just a few hours ago, he was stripped naked and almost had someone throw him into boiling water and cook him like a pig." Ka-ching! With force in his hand, he broke a piece of firewood and threw it inside the fire. The other brothers' faces also had a fierce look on them. They were all young and strong, just the age of hot blood. In order to protect their brothers and the village, they were able to lay down their lives to fight. But being betrayed by the people they were protecting made them furious. Xiao Guang looked at Gao Tianwu, "Brother Wu, kill all those ungrateful bastards." The others also looked at Gao Tianwu, waiting for him to speak. As long as Gao Tianwu gave a word, they would do it tomorrow. Gao Tianwu frowned tightly. They had grown up in the village since they were young. Which of these villagers was not a familiar face? Many were also relatives of the clan. He thought for a moment and added a piece of firewood to the fire. No overkill, most of them in today's matter was nothing more than following the wind and being held hostage by Meng Chuan and the others. With that, he raised his head, a flash of sternness in his eyes. "But there isn't an innocent person who has moved against a few of our brothers today. Those guys must die." Everyone nodded, agreeing with Gao Tianwu's statement. Just at this time, a knock came from outside the house. The brothers looked outside with somber faces. "Who?" An old voice came from outside the doors. "Xiao Gao Tianwu, Xiao Guang, it was me, Fourth Grandpa." Fourth Grandpa was an elder in Gaoyuan village. Most of the people in Gaoyuan village had the surname Gao, so the seniority ranking was more serious. Gao Tianwu did not say anything. Xiao Guang stood up and walked over to open the doors. They saw Fourth Grandpa with a few Gao family honchos, looking at them with a nervous and pleasing face. "Xiao Guang, are you all right? Those few damned brutes, they even tried to do that kind of thing to you, they deserve to die. But this matter is something we are completely unaware of, you guys mustn't misunderstand." Xiao Guang was tall and condescending as he looked at the few people in front of him. He still remembered that among the several Gao family members behind Fourth Grandpa, there were two who were screaming the loudest, wishing to immediately throw him into boiling water and cook him to share the meat. The corner of Xiao Guang's mouth quirked. "Don't worry about it, they were all my own family members, can I still misunderstand you guys?" When Fourth Grandpa and the others heard these words, their hanging hearts were instantly released. Right, we are all family, unlike that Meng, he's a bad embryo. Whatever you guys do in the future, we'll fully support you." A few people gave a round of compliments before leaving with peace of mind. They, however, did not notice that a cold smile appeared at the corner of Xiao Guang's mouth. Xiao Guang closed the door and returned to the fire, picking up a roasted leg of lamb and gnawing hard. A few brothers beside him asked in confusion, "Xiao Guang, why are you so polite with them? I do remember that we even came over and kicked you a few times at that time." Xiao Guang hemmed and hawed, his eyes glaring gloomily. "We still have injuries on our bodies, don't mess with them at this time. When the brothers are rested, the ones who should be avenged, one won't be able to run away." Only then did the crowd understand, and all of a sudden there were meaningful smiles on their faces. Behind them, one after another, other people came over and swore that they were not involved in this matter. Gao Tianwu and the others did as they were told and pacified them first. When it was time to sleep at night, they didn't dare to all sleep, but instead took turns arranging for people to be on duty. By the next day, the Gao family brothers had finished resting, and with the addition of eating and drinking, their state had recovered more or less. Gao Tianwu took out a steel wine pot from his pocket, gulped and poured 2 mouthfuls for himself, then Xiao Guang passed it down in turn. After everyone had finished drinking, Gao Tianwu closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he was already tough and resolute, without a hint of hesitation. Take action, anyone who was involved in the attack on us last night, don't leave a single one behind. It was still early in the day, and the villagers were already not going out on weekdays, coupled with the fact that there was not enough food. Most of the time they were lying in their quilts at home. A few brothers went out with the weapons given by Zhang Yi and started to go door to door to look for the people who attacked them yesterday to liquidate them. In the Gaoyuan village in the early morning, there would be an occasional burst of gunfire, and in less than 10 minutes, all of those people would be back. Frog was sitting near Gao Tianwu, taking out a harp from somewhere and was rubbing it carefully. When Gao Tianwu saw the bloodstains on the people, he knew that this matter was over. From now on, we have nothing more to do with Gaoyuan village. Gao Tianwu shouted, "Go!" Xiao Guang's body suddenly began to distort before collapsing onto the ground, his limbs twisting strangely and turning into a car a moment later. His ability was Autobot, and he had also been jokingly referred to as Toolman. Because Xiao Guang's previous job was a driver, he especially liked cars, and he didn't expect that after awakening his supernatural ability, he was turning himself into a car and letting others drive it. "Xiao Guang, can it hold up?" Gao Tianwu looked at the large amount of supplies that were already packed in his backpack and asked Xiao Guang. Xiao Guang replied, "Don't worry, I've already eaten and drunk enough, I have plenty of stamina now." The crowd stuffed all the supplies inside the car and squeezed into it. "Depart." The Xiao Guang branded automobile made a rumbling roar, then left Gaoyuan village and headed towards Tianhai city. Rib bit. With a single bullet, the big frog jumped out dozens of meters, following the side of the automobile with no loss of speed. Only after they left did the people in the village come out of the house in fear. After realizing that many people had been killed, they began to cry and curse Gao Tianwu and the others for not being human. But all of this was no longer relevant to the Gao Tianwu brothers. Lacking food and losing their protectors, they couldn't survive this winter. Chapter 1102 Chicken Flavor, Crunchy. Gao Tianwu took 7 or 8 of his brothers and left Gaoyuan village on the Xiao Guang, sailing towards downtown Tianhai city. That place was once a place that they were incomparably longing for. The brothers had also always wanted to go there to make their way. They knew that more resources must exist in the big city that would allow them to better survive. Only at that time, the villagers of Gaoyuan village begged bitterly for Gao Tianwu to stay and protect them. It was Gao Tianwu who remembered the love of his fellow villagers and finally chose to stay in Gaoyuan village. But now, everything had passed, they no longer had any worries, and now, they were helping Zhang Yi, the king of Tianhai, and could travel to Tianhai city with a straight face. Rib bit. Rib bit. Along the way, the frog's cry echoed. Every time it leapt up high before gently falling down, the sound echoed throughout the land. The frog croak's ability would echo after touching an object. The ability to retrieve bugs, especially for bugs, was very sharp. The frog could discover prey that existed within the target area in this way. Gao Tianwu and the others could find the location of the cockroach swarm by following it. The crowd arrived at the Ao mountain area, which was a remote place in the middle of nowhere. The crowd got out of the car. Gao Tianwu took out food and stuffed it into Xiao Guang's mouth. His mouth was at the front of the car at the moment. Xiao Guang took a big bite of food to replenish his strength. Looking at the vast expanse of land in front of him, Gao Tianwu's heart was flooded with a sense of grandeur. From now on, we will form a new group. This group will be called the School of Wu. He pointed at the earth beneath his feet. We're going to start here and lay our foundation. The brothers around them all had excited expressions. When they were young, who wouldn't wish to build a career and make a mark? Now that the world was in chaos, it just happened to be a great time for them to show off their skills. Frog is not a fan of these things. He concentrated on polishing his favorite harp, and then rolled around in the snow. The skin was thick anyway, and the cool outside temperature was no problem for him at all. No matter what, he was happy. Seeing this, Gao Tianwu shook his head helplessly. "Frog, did you hear what I said so much?" The frog twisted his head to look at him, rib-bit. Here, you said there's a lot of food here, right?" Rib-bit. Gao Tianwu was rather helpless as he looked at the frog's self-smiling face. "All right, let's get to work. In 10 days' time, we have to travel to every corner of the entire Tianhai city." Other people might not be able to do it, but they had the Shaoguang branded automobile, so it wouldn't be a problem at all. It consumed 2 chicken legs for 100 kilometers, and it also had an autopilot function, was natural and harmless, and the exhaust emissions were still green organic fertilizer. The school of Wu Door's brothers have all worked in Tianhai City, so they have a better understanding of the situation here. The reason they chose the Ao Mountain area in the first place was because it was a poorer area of Tianhai City, where a large number of foreigners gathered, and there was more garbage. Since cockroaches were proliferating, it was likely that this was the birthplace. "Frog, let's begin. Use your flute to attract the cockroach swarm," Gao Tianwu said to the frog. Rib-bit, "Okay, no problem. I'll take care of this kind of thing, so please perk up your ears and listen carefully to my beautiful playing." Rib-bit. The frog stuffed the harp into his mouth, then deftly moved his 6 fingers over the holes of the harp. He stood on the snow and danced around, looking as if he was a gypsy performing in the streets. But surprisingly, the music he was playing was incomparably beautiful. The melodious tune caused the school of Wu brothers to become somewhat intoxicated. The music was melodious, transforming into a gust of sound waves that spread out towards the vast snow plains, also penetrating through the thick layers of snow and dirt and into the underground. It wasn't long before rustling sounds began to appear on the surrounding ice surface, which was the rattling of the ice and snow as cracks appeared. The scene that appeared next was such that Gao Tianwu and the others couldn't help but swallow their saliva as well. The snowy plain that originally looked white and flawless, suddenly a large number of black cockroaches emerged from under the snow surface, spreading towards this side like a tidal wave. The frogs were playing their own elegant tunes, not caring about the huge swarm of cockroaches. The cockroaches also displayed a strange state, as if they were immersed in this melodious music, instead of attacking Gao Tianwu and the others. "It is now!" Gao Tianwu leapt up and jumped on top of the Shaoguang automobile. Opening his arms, a layer of red-colored light sprang up all over his body. Raging flames burned up on his body in an instant. 5 directions of enlightenment, Moko enlightenment, primordial pure demon karma flame. He formed a diamond-shaped seal with both hands and condensed a hole, then a large amount of flames erupted from amongst the hole, heading straight towards the cockroach tide like a fire dragon. The brothers of School of Wu, on the other hand, took out various prepared weapons, which were detonators provided to them by Zhang Yi, and began to launch attacks on the cockroach tide. The cockroaches, on the other hand, seemed as if they had lost their consciousness, letting the School of Wu sect's people launch attacks on them without the slightest resistance. This kind of creatures that bred out in large numbers and dominated the colony only had the instinct to feed and reproduce. Frog was their greatest nemesis. His ability Zerg Nemesis could make these brainless, low IQ bugs easily compelled. The frog bounced in place and blew music. The music kept on going, and the tide of cockroaches that emerged over became denser and denser, spreading over the entire land. The Gao Tianwu brothers were obliterating with all their might. For more than half an hour, the entire snowy plain was quiet. The blackened cockroach corpses densely covered the entire snowy plain, looking at people's scalp numb. At this time, the frog also stopped blowing. Seeing the food all over the ground, he clapped his hands excitedly. Rib-bit. Rib-bit, rib-bit. Rib-bit. So much food, it smells so good. He opened his big mouth and from it, a pink tongue popped out, surprisingly 7 or 8 meters long. Hell knows how this thing was hidden in his mouth. He just casually rolled it on the snow, and a large amount of roasted cockroaches entered his mouth. The frog ate with an intoxicated look on his face, watching the brothers of School of Wu regurgitate their stomachs for a while. This stuff, is it really that tasty? Xiao Guang couldn't even help but ask. Although they had a natural aversion to things like cockroaches. But after the end of the world, many inedible things, such as rats, they had tried to eat. Nowadays, their stomachs were accommodating to many foods. Why don't we try it? Gao Tianwu thought about it, walked over and picked up a cockroach, and with a fierce attack, directly threw it into his mouth. As a result, after eating it, he was somewhat surprised to find that the taste was not bad. They didn't realize that inside the 3 major bases in Hai City as today, the manufacturing process of cockroach protein was still retained. After these cockroaches were roasted, they actually weren't too far off from a chicken leg. The big guys were all very tired, so they sat around and literally just picked up the roasted cockroaches and feasted on them. Cockroaches were a real treat. If this thing had popped up earlier, the village wouldn't have starved in the first place. Yeah, speaking of which, why have there suddenly been more of these things? What do they eat? A brother stuffed 2 cockroaches into his mouth and asked carelessly. But this one sentence made everyone's eating movements stop. Eat what? What else can we eat? The crowd looked at me, I looked at you, and the only sound left in the air was the sound of the frog eating, and he seemed to be eating happily. FCK, whatever. After just a moment's hesitation, the big guy continued to eat again. Chapter 1103, Entering the Lair. Gao Tianwu and Frog and the others spent the next few hours in Tianhai City, killing cockroaches everywhere. With Frog's help, even if the cockroach clusters were dozens of meters deep underground, they would be found by Frog with pinpoint accuracy. The Frog then used his harp to attract the cockroaches out, and then Gao Tianwu and the others would step in to kill them. The overall coordination was very smooth. The vast majority of the frog croaks were simply unable to resist the lure of this frog croak song. They basically didn't rest much either, and were on their way to kill insects every day except for sleeping. The problem of eating was also very well solved. Zhang Yi had prepared a large amount of food for them, but slowly, they actually fell in love with eating hot, high-protein cockroach meat. Especially some of the large cockroaches were able to grow to the size of a kitten, a puppy, or even as big as a human. Their bodies were rich in protein, enough to give the people of School of Wu a good full meal. When people stayed in hungry conditions for a long time, they would slowly become numb to the food, and even gradually, they were still fond of this kind of food. All of this was caught in Zhang Yi's eyes. He himself did not expect that these guys really had such strength. Especially that frog, he actually played the biggest role in the whole plan. Frogs, having a restraint for insects, that was quite reasonable. Zhang Yi said so. Yang Xinxin, however, said, although they can kill the cockroaches, the cockroach problem won't go away if they can't solve the culprit. Moreover, with the tide of cockroaches being superior, the ones that survived were cockroaches with better survivability, which will only lead to things getting more and more troublesome. Zhang Yi sniffed and folded his hands together, slowly rubbing his hands together before saying indifferently, in the worst-case scenario, it was just the cockroach tide becoming stronger and then attacking the shelter as well as the 3 major bases. But that wasn't a problem for me. My ability can't actively remove a large number of cockroaches, but it was still no problem to guard the several bases in Tianhai City. The other party's purpose couldn't just be to assault me, it must have something else in mind. That's why I'm giving Gao Tianwu and that frog a chance to see if they can create a little miracle out of me. Don't be in a hurry, let's just wait quietly. The advantage is with me. Zhang Yi said indifferently. Yang Xinxin nodded, but then, a dark luster appeared amongst her amber-colored pupils as she twisted her head and said to Zhang Yi, but brother I have another thought. If the other party is just trying to cause trouble for Tianhai City, that was just a small problem. But if, on the other hand, the other party is some unexpected and powerful enemy of yours that was coming to target you, then shouldn't we take the initiative to make them show themselves? These words instantly alerted Zhang Yi. You don't say, I really thought of someone. The duo looked at each other and said in unison, Gao Changkong. Back then, Gao Changkong had laid down heavy schemes, playing the entire Jiangnan region in the palm of his hand, and was just short of succeeding in killing Zhu Zheng and taking the throne. But all of that was ruined by the sudden rise of Zhang Yi. To say that Gao Changkong did not hold a grudge against Zhang Yi in his heart was impossible. Nowadays, the person who had the ability to launch an attack on Zhang Yi without any scruples, thinking left and right, Gao Changkong was the most suspected. But Zhang Yi quickly shook his head. If he really has such means, he should also go to Zhu Zheng. What's the point of coming over to me? Yang Xinxin lowered her head and said in a deep voice, the hatred in a person's heart was immeasurable. Brother not everyone is like you. There are some people who will turn their revenge on others because they don't dare to strike out against a powerful enemy. Zhang Yi's brows furrowed. Gao Changkong. That was an opponent with an incomparably deep mind that made even Zhang Yi quite fearful. If a person wasn't stoic enough, how could he plot and lay out his plans for such a long time, cover his heart, and even completely hide his strength under the eyes of so many people in the Jiangnan region? Could it be him? Zhang Yi pondered. Yang Xinxin said, whether it was him or not, but we still have to be prepared. In case the other party really wants to take revenge on brother through us with the 3 major bases, what can we do if we just give him a chance? Zhang Yi raised his eyebrows and seemed to somewhat understand Yang Xinxin's thoughts. It sounds like a bit of fun. The school of Wu's people, led by Gao Tian and Frog, had been tirelessly killing cockroach waves throughout Tianhai City. The ability of Zerd Nemesis made it very easy for them to eliminate the cockroach tide. In less than 10 days, most of the cockroach tide in Tianhai City had been eliminated. Even those insecticide experts in Zhang Yi's family was amazed by this. They said to Zhang Yi, perhaps compared to us, these people can solve the cockroach tide problem better. Because we were only killing the cockroaches through the spreading efficacy of the genetic drug. But they have the ability to actively search for cockroach waves. In that case, there is a possibility that they could actually find the roach tide's home base. Zhang Yi was deeply impressed when he heard this. That frog's ability is indeed very interesting. Other than that, in terms of dealing with bugs as a field, the frog was the epsilon. And this kind of speed in killing bugs made the bug master below West Mountain Base, the one who raised bugs with cockroaches, become a huge headache. Raising a new batch of bugs takes a lot of time. Even bugs like cockroaches had to grow up before they could help him create chaos in Tianhai City. However, he did not know what means the other party was using to eliminate a large number of bug swarms in a short period of time. If it's just killing bugs, it didn't matter how many more times it was. The bugmaster's hand clutched a huge cockroach, his ugly face twisted, and his eyes were filled with a vicious color. The reason why I chose the cockroach was because it was the bug with the strongest reproduction ability and the most tenacious vitality. As long as my existence won't be discovered, then sooner or later, Tianhai City will be overwhelmed by the increasingly powerful swarms of cockroaches. Even you, Zhang Yi, was not able to deal with such things, right? However, the bugmaster didn't realize that Gao Tianwu and the rest of the school of Wu brothers, as well as the frog who called himself Haruki Murakami, had already arrived at the West Mountain District. Outside the West Mountain Base, the Shaoguang brand car was parked far above the snowy plain. Ribbit, the frog's chirping echoed above the vast snow plain, and although the sound couldn't travel too far, the breadth of the sound waves was able to cover a range of 5 kilometers in a circle. Within this range, abnormal creatures would be detected by it, especially bugs. Chapter 1104, Someone Behind the Scenes. They had traveled all the way west from the Ao mountainous region, swatting away many insect swarms, and in the process of heading southwest, they would inevitably have to pass through the western mountainous region. This place was now an abandoned land, looking even more desolate due to the lack of human activity. From this, Gao Tianwu deduced that there might be a large number of cockroaches underground here. They just wanted to clean it up a bit in order. However, it did not occur to him that when the frog was probing this place, the smile on his face, which was originally always wearing a bright smile, suddenly froze. On a rare occasion, the corners of that raised mouth sank, and his expression became cautious. Gao Tianwu sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly asked, "What's wrong?" "Rib bit." "I'm here, sensing something unusual." The frog's eyes moved down to look at the feet. Huge paws stomped on the snow. "Rib bit. Down here, a very terrifying number of swarms are hiding. And there are many terrifying big guys." He glanced at Gao Tianwu. "Perhaps, we've found the cockroach's lair." Gao Tianwu froze for a moment, then said with a face full of surprise, "Great! We've found it with no effort. This way, we don't have to go through all the trouble of running all over Tianhai City to look for them." The frog, however, said to Gao Tianwu, "But do you remember what Mr. Zhang said to you before he left?" "Rib bit." Of course Gao Tianwu remembered. Zhang Yi had reminded them back then that behind the cockroach tide, there might be mutants manipulating it. That was why Zhang Yi had left a communication device for Gao Tianwu. Once a track of mutant activity was discovered, Zhang Yi would be notified immediately to come over and deal with it. After all, since the enemy in the dark dared to take action against Zhang Yi, his strength was definitely not to be underestimated. Gao Tianwu clenched his fists and suddenly raised his head to look at the frog, his eyes resolute as he said, "No, this problem, it has to be solved by us." "Frog, rib bit?" He spread out his huge flippers with a helpless face. "Gao Tianwu, if we really found the cockroach's lair, then our mission is already accomplished. There's no need to continue risking our lives." Gao Tianwu shook his head. "I don't think so. If I just found the cockroach's lair, I would at most receive some reward from that person. But what I want was more than that. I want to take my brothers and put down roots in this part of Tianhai City. Then it's necessary to get Mr. Zhang's approval. Therefore, I have to seize this opportunity to prove the strength of our brothers. Only by showing our worth will people have a reason to take us in. I have to consider if this is the only chance I'll ever have in this life." Gao Tianwu's impassioned speech had infected the frogs who had originally retreated a bit. The brothers and others behind him had already picked up their weapons and were ready for a painful life and death battle. Frog stared at Gao Tianwu. Gao Tianwu also stared at the frog. "Old friend, just help me one more time." "Rib bit." The frog nodded, then turned around and leapt forward. Its 4 flippers landed on the ground, and its stomach sucked in air violently, then bulged roundly. Then, an even louder frog croak instantly resounded through the entire snowy plain. "Rib bit, rib bit, rib bit." The frog croak pierced through the earth, reaching all the way to the underground of the West Mountain base, echoing continuously amongst the ruins. After all the cockroaches heard this sound, they unexpectedly, as if possessed, began to collectively turn around and crawl towards the outside. The ugly-faced bugmaster was instantly startled, and then a vicious color appeared on his face. "Have I been found?" Outside West Mountain base, the frog croak of the frogs echoed continuously. This was a declaration of war. They naturally wouldn't enter the underground to fight, but if the other party didn't come out, then Frog's Zerg nemesis would directly destroy almost all of the mutated cockroaches underground. The expressions of the Gao Tianwu brothers were as grim as steel. At this moment, they were ready to fight and even sacrifice. In order to excel and fight for a future, the only thing they could take out as a bet was their lives. If they win the bet, they will be rich and honorable. If you lose, it was just a matter of death. After the end of the world, they are accustomed to seeing life and death. Many of them are indeed not so afraid of death. They were just afraid of dying without any meaning. Rumble. A rumbling sound came from beneath the earth. The thick layer of snow shattered in pieces, followed by a tide of cockroaches that emerged like a tidal wave. Densely packed, as if the gates had been opened to release the flood that had been accumulating for a long time. This was the cockroach's lair, the ugly bugmaster's experimental base. So the ones that were here were the father and mother of the source of those mutated cockroaches in Tianhai City. They were even more huge and appalling. Palm-sized cockroaches were all over the place. The frog raised its harp and began to play with its hands. Having the harp's added power allowed its frog croak ability to spread farther. The cockroaches surrounded everyone, but instead of attacking, they quietly lay on the ground like they were possessed and listened to the frog's tune. "Do it!" Gao Tianwu struck his hands, and crimson flames flowed above his body. He pushed his palms towards the front, and shot after shot of human head-sized flames fell into the cockroach swarm. Soon, the cockroach swarm burned. They were all high-protein creatures that burned very easily and in one go. They were too experienced in this kind of treatment. When ordinary cockroaches encountered frogs, they were really encountering a natural enemy, and had no ability to resist until they died. Only Gao Tianwu also knew that things were not that simple. If this really was a cockroach lair, then there must be even harder guys to deal with. Gao Tianwu cautiously looked around. Suddenly, Frog opened his eyes that were mesmerized by the music. He looked in a certain direction and his gaze sharpened before giving Gao Tianwu a wink. Gao Tianwu understood and instantly looked over. It was a mountain peak covered in heavy snow. Suddenly, a popping sound was emitted from within the mountain peak, and large swathes of snow avalanched and began to collapse. Right behind the collapsing snow, a large shadow slowly appeared. Flying snow filled the sky, and those shadows slowly began to approach Gao Tianwu and the others. After the snowflakes flew down, their shadows were revealed. It was a strange man with a face as hideous and ugly as an evil ghost, a face with his five senses shifted as if it had been randomly pieced together. His hunched body was as thin as a bone, but his gaze glowed with a disgusting yellowish-white color. He was like a human-sized cockroach, staring at Gao Tianwu and the others with a deadly stare, making the Gao Tianwu brothers and the few others look at him a little hairy. Sure enough, Mr. Zhang was right, there really is a mastermind behind the scenes. Chapter 1105, Fighting for a Future. The ugly bugmaster, the mastermind behind the cockroach tide in Tianhai City, had finally appeared. No one recognized who he was, as his features had lost their human appearance. But Gao Tianwu and the others knew that he was extremely dangerous. This was because around him, there were actually dozens of giant cockroaches that were 2 to 3 meters long. These things were something they had never encountered in the past. Each cockroach's armor was a disgusting shit yellow color, with huge wings growing behind them. Xiao Guang's people were all a bit dumbfounded. This cockroach of this size, how much food waste must it eat? Gao Tianwu said in a deep voice, "Kill it." The bugmaster he sneered, "I thought it was Zhang Yi who came, but it turned out to be a little punk. Then all of them will die here and become fertilizer for my babies." As soon as his words fell, the dozens of cockroaches around him leapt up violently and charged towards Gao Tianwu and the others like a cannonball. Gao Tianwu roared in anger, his hands clasped together, and his body unexpectedly glowed with a layer of golden light. In the next instant, his body was like a Buddha statue in a temple. His precious appearance was solemn, and his skin had turned into the golden color of a Buddha statue. When Gao Tianwu was 8 years old, his parents had once brought him to Sheru Mountain to pay homage to the Buddha. At that time, a senior monk had told his parents that he was born with a Buddha's destiny, and since then, although he had not entered the doors, he was convinced that Zen Buddhism was unshakable. Buddhism was an idea that could penetrate the hearts of people. The power of faith allowed him to start moving towards the realm of Buddha after he was born with supernatural abilities. As in the case of his ability 5 Directions of Enlightenment, it was derived from the protector god of the Buddhist sect. Golden Light Enlightenment. Gao Tianwu was shrouded in golden light, facing the monsters that were swooping in. He leaped forward to directly meet them. Behind him, the brothers of School of Wu did not slacken off either, roaring and pulling the trigger, firing at them with the rifles in their hands. Frog's frequency of playing the harp began to accelerate, and although the power of the Zerg Nemesis was unable to completely suppress these mutated giant cockroaches, it was able to produce a certain impact, causing their mobility to be tremendously constrained. Gao Tianwu relied on the Buddha's light to protect his body, and fought with those giant cockroaches in close quarters. Xiao Guang was even more direct. After transforming into a car, he rumbled the gas pedal, directly relying on his thick skin and flesh towards a cockroach. Gao Tianwu's fist smashed into the body of a cockroach, immediately knocked the 2-meter-high cockroach flew out 4 or 5 meters away, rolling several times in the snow. But the defense and vitality of this creature was too strong, and it quickly stood up and shook its wings to kill towards Gao Tianwu again. Soon, he was surrounded by a large group of cockroaches in the center. Gao Tianwu's face did not show the slightest bit of fear. Since he dared to come against these cockroaches, he had prepared for it. He pulled out a bottle of spirits from his bosom and drank it, then opened his mouth to spew out a raging flame. Moksha enlightenment, prajna karmic flame of pure demon karma. Bugs feared flames the most, it was their nature. As soon as Gao Tianwu's flames came out, the surrounding cockroaches immediately backed away in fear. "Big brother, I'm coming." Xiao Guang rumbled his exhaust before rushing into the middle of the battlefield. He flew up in the air, and the trunk automatically opened, then a dozen plastic buckets fell down from it. Plastic buckets fell on the hard ground, snap. The plastic barrels directly shattered with a sound, and the gasoline inside was splattered everywhere. Those cockroaches were inevitably splattered. Gao Tianwu took the opportunity to release flames and smashed his right fist fiercely into the ground. Immediately a fire dragon followed the traces of gasoline straight towards those cockroaches. Phew! The raging fire rose suddenly, and a group of cockroaches were wrapped in the fire, so frightened that they lost control. Fear of flames was their instinct. For a moment, dozens of giant cockroaches unexpectedly didn't dare to attack Gao Tianwu and the others, instead choosing to hide. This scene could infuriate that bugmaster. But after all, it was a lowly creature, and it was impossible to expect them to be able to live and have no brain, and still have a strong fighting ability, right? With a turn of his gaze, he realized what the problem was. On the surface, Gao Tianwu and the others were the main force in the battle. In reality, the one who had the greatest impact on the cockroach tide was still that frog. If he could be killed, the cockroach tide would not be affected, and Gao Tianwu and the others was bound to die. The bugmaster opened his mouth and let out a bug chirp, and after 5 or 6 giant cockroaches received the order, they immediately flew at the frog. Seeing this, the frog had to stop blowing. Rib bit. Do the bugs want to prey on the frog? Facing the giant cockroach's attack, he directly met it with a jerk. The cockroach's huge claw blades stabbed at the frog, resulting in the frog's snow-white belly slamming into it without dodging. Nonetheless, it didn't receive any damage. Instead, the cockroach was violently bounced out dozens of meters away. It spat out its own long tongue and flung it like a long whip, and the mucus attached to its tongue quickly glued the other giant cockroaches together, turning it into a ball of cockroaches. Rib bit. Frogs just don't like to fight, but against bugs, frogs don't lose, yo! The frog slapped its stomach and laughed happily. Frog was a pacifist. But that didn't mean he wasn't strong. If that was the case, who was he to make Gao Tianwu treat him with courtesy and send food to draw him closer? Bugmaster's expression was gloomy at this moment. He had already sensed that the situation seemed a bit off. But then what could be done? He was just a bugmaster, and his ability was to control the bugs, as well as catalyze the evolution of the swarm. But he couldn't fight himself. In order to create big trouble for Tianhai City, he chose cockroaches as his receptors. However, he didn't expect that he would encounter the frog as his nemesis. "Damn it, all of you, die for me!" The bugmaster roared and pulled out a sword before slowly slitting his wrist. He was bone-thin, and the blood that flowed out was surprisingly green. The giant cockroaches around him smelled the blood and quickly surrounded him. After the bugmaster fed his blood to the cockroaches, all of a sudden, their eyes were glowing with blood. Squeak dash! The cockroaches let out ferocious chirps. Gao Tianwu and the others' faces sank, knowing that the other party was trying to fight for their lives. Good timing, let's just take you all down with a bang. Zhang Yi was never stingy with the people around him, especially those who could help him out. So this time, the weapons and equipment he gave to Gao Tianwu and the others were also very sufficient. It was not just ordinary weapons and bullets. There were also flamethrowers that specialized in dealing with cockroach swarms, as well as special grenades that could inflict a wide range of lethality. These young men from School of Wu were fearless, picking up their weapons and rushing up to do battle with those mutated cockroaches. Frog sighed, frogs don't like to fight, but these big bugs look as if they're delicious. I'll just stock up on more food for spring. Rib bit.